Well, hello. This is the fourth part to a much longer reaction. If you haven't seen them yet, links to them are in the description as well in the top corner of the video. Now, with that out of the way, let's get this thing started then, shall we?
However, for the purpose of this series, I personally think it's most likely that hyperlink blocked is referring to love. It's the only interpretation of it I've seen that seems to fit each instance of it the most, and given the implications that love clearly had in Undertale, I couldn't think of reasons why love of all things would be worth censoring, especially when you think about the fact that he does enable the player and Noelle to keep getting stronger in the weird route, and do this game's equivalent of becoming stronger as a result of breaking bonds and distancing yourself from any emotional attachment to the game's world and characters. I doubt that this is something I can really work with in any case, and I obviously could be very wrong. For all I know, it's maybe actually referring to fear, or hate, or some other kind of special hell. But it feels worth having some answer for, because regardless, Gaster's influence on Spamton was so potent that he not only knows of a concept that is currently being censored by the powers that be, but he even was close to saying something about the night before getting cut off and I guess having the night completely erased from his memory if the Q&A was anything to go off of. That, and with Unused also speaking through him, he is a whole can of worms. So much so that if my theory about Gaster intervening during the Neo fight is true, then it makes Spamton a case where Gaster had to give the player an advantage in order to keep Spamton from going too far out of line. But aside from that, when looking at all three of these characters, I feel they each embody a different facet of this theme of freedom, and as I put it, the illusion of. Jevil and Spamton especially feel like they're on opposite ends of a spectrum. Jevil being on the end of accepting whatever he had learned about his reality and declaring freedom in that he can do anything, in the wake of realizing the sheer lack thereof. In essence, nothing matters, so I can do whatever I want. Whereas Spamton obviously doesn't quite feel that way. He feels robbed of freedom. It's something that he has to attain by any means necessary. He won't accept what he's learned about his world or accept his circumstances in general. He wants to defy fate itself and reach for heaven, and become as powerful, if not even more so, than the Lighteners or even the player. And Sham completely rejects the idea of freedom. They fully accepted the futility of defying fate and would rather just sit back and watch it all happen with no worry. There is somewhat muted Jevil in that regard. Not maniacal, but just accepting that this is how things are. While they don't tell us a lot about Gaster directly, what they each learn from him all seem to line up with this theme of grappling with the idea of finding freedom, or perhaps seeing it as only an illusion, and this is something that's going to only pop up more as we keep looking at the game through the Gaster lens. And continuing on, each of these characters also obviously share the trait of knowing way too much about how Deltarune works. As I've touched on already, they each have their ways of either breaking almost outside the bounds of the game itself, or acknowledging the boundaries at least, which is just as notable.
Well, I mean, yeah, Jevil especially. I mean, he's the only... Well, no, Jevil and Spamton, because, I mean, Jevil is the only one so far who's had, like, as said before, like a 3D-ish background, the whole carousel sort of deal, you know, world revolving, still a good song. And then you have a Spamton who's... I mean, a lot of enemies manipulate the battlefield when you're in a fight in some way, but Spamton's the one, like, even before he hit Neo, like, Spamton took it to just another level.
Sham remembers your fights with secret bosses on different save files. Jevil directly mentions future events in the game. And while his dialogue about being the only free one could be just taken as him being insane or commenting on his playful nihilism, it may also be a way of him acknowledging the fact that he's one of the only Darkners who sees beyond what the other Darkners see. He is free in that he knows that the program layer, or the space between worlds, exists. And Spamton is unusually aware of the soul and its potential, and I'd say both him and Jevil seem more aware of what things look like on the player's end in general. So, whatever Gaster did or said to them made them more aware of things on a meta level. Which leads us into the fourth character that I feel fits into this group, Ralsei, who I've already gone over ad nauseum in regards to meta shit. He has a heightened awareness of how things look like on the player's end and player controls in general, seems to refer to the player more than he refers to Chris, and in context with the meta-narrative, as I've gone over, I feel he represents a personification of being very concerned about the player's experience.
Actually, think about it. Do you think Ralsei will end up being a secret boss at some point? Like, imagine if that actually happened. Like, you start collecting things, and throughout the chapter, like, Ralsei starts getting, you know, a little weirded out by collecting these things. And then, at the end of it, he's like, nope, I have to stop you, I'm sorry. and then that's the secret boss battle, and then like if you win, you end up defeating him. It's like, sorry, I don't know what I was thinking. Please forgive me, that sort of thing. But ooh.
Which may explain a lot of the changes to especially the Dark World UI between chapters. And I believe this ends up causing a very interesting revelation with the slightest bit of evidence supporting it. The common thread between Sham, Spamton, and Jevil is that they were all influenced by Gaster, and that's what led to them becoming more self-aware and cognizant of things on the player's end. And Rouse, I'd argue, is the most cognizant of things on the player's end. Even if risking confirmation bias, this bit of info, along with the fact that Gaster quoted the prophecy in Wingdings on the Deltarune website, and the fact that Rouse's wording about the prophecy refers to it being told across time and space, echoing how Gaster's shattering was described, I think it's clear the kind of connection that can be made here. I believe Gaster must have spoken to Rouse at some point too, or at least influenced him significantly. Now obviously, I don't know through what means, but when you look at how both Gaster and Rouse take great interest in Chris and Susie especially, and how Rouse is focusing on the player, it's like he's a guide of sorts that Gaster employed to assist the player over the course of the game. And I don't know about you, but I just can't think of another explanation for Rouse's increased self-awareness that would make any more sense than this just based on lore alone. It explains why he knows what he does, it explains his focus on the player at all times, and it may even explain why he shrugs off what happens with Spamton. He knows what Sham and the secret bosses know, but he isn't affected by it in a way that would put Chris and Susie at any harm, or would otherwise just leave him completely nihilistic. Plus, it explains this tone that he has at times. This tone that sounds like he has a vague idea of what's going to happen later down the line that he just hasn't opened up about yet. And in relation to themes, while he isn't explicitly focused on freedom, he does tangentially tie into it by being the person responsible for keeping things on rails. He's in a way the antithesis to the secret bosses in that he'd rather just focus on what is most important, sealing the fountains and going along with the prophecy. And even then, he does say that he thinks the player's choices do matter. He does advocate for freedom, even if he'd rather the player focus on recruiting the Darkners and treating them all with kindness. However, with that said, if I'm able to say with some confidence that Gaster has influenced all four of these characters and that they each do relate to the game's theme of freedom in some way or another, then we need to have an answer to one specific question.
What made
How
them
did
go
he
mad?
influence them?
Yeah.
What exactly did Gaster do or say to them that altered their worldview in such a dramatic way?
He did like Nick Fury in that one Marvel, I don't know, a Marvel story with Thor. He just whispered in their ear saying, "You're not worthy."
In other words, for the secret bosses especially, what made them go mad? Because surely they each had to learn something incredibly substantial and earth-shattering to warrant it. And if it's something that affects every secret boss in the game and every character of that sort, you'd think there would have to be an answer to this.
No, what do you know? He probably... Okay, so what do you want to bet? That Gaster was just being really annoying, and he ended up just saying, "You're not real," on repeat in their heads for like weeks on end until they all broke. Like, how much would it suck if that was the actual reason why they got nuts? They'd be annoyed to death.
And the thing is, I don't think it's as simple as Gaster just going up to them and telling them that it's all actually fake, or a simulation, and that they're living in a video game and nothing matters. If I were to come up to you and tell you that everything is a simulation, or fake, or that you're living in some kind of computer, maybe you'd ponder on the idea, but it wouldn't make you go mad, probably. I imagine that thinking about it alone wouldn't warrant such a severe shift in view. If we want to understand what it is that made them go mad, we have to look at what madness in this context really means. And of all things, a fucking Tumblr post I think nails this concept and applies very well to what I think happened to them. And I'd like to read it out for you, originally written by user Bramblesand. An ant doesn't start babbling when they see a circuit board. They find it strange. To them, it is a landscape of strange angles and humming monoliths. They may be scared, but that is not madness. Madness comes when the ant, for a moment, can see as a human does. It understands those markings are words, symbols with meaning, like a pheromone but infinitely more complex. It can travel unimaginable distances to lands unlike anything it has seen before. It knows of mirth, embarrassment, love, concepts unimaginable before this moment, and then it's an ant again. Echoes of things it cannot comprehend swirl around its mind. It cannot make use of this knowledge, but it still remembers. How is it supposed to return to its life? The more the Ent saw, the harder it is for it to forget. It needs to see it again, understand again. It will do anything to show others, to show itself. Nothing else in this tiny world matters. This is madness.
Oh. So Gaster might have shown them and let them experience what life is like outside of their box, so to speak. And I guess you could also show with Spamton. That was pretty much what he did, because all of a sudden Spamton was just like everything he sold was selling like hotcakes. He was so successfully he got to move into the Queen's mansion, but then that ability, that power, was taken away. And now he's the Ant again. Okay.
I don't know what Gaster might have said exactly to Spamton and Jevil, or even Rousey, but what I do know is that, at least in Spamton and Jevil's cases, I believe he must have made them see things the way that Gaster does. Going back to the device theory, Gaster exists outside of the light and dark worlds. To him, everything within both worlds are fictional, and he is the only real thing in the program, even if he knows that a player exists. I feel that to make a Darkener see things the way that Gaster does means to show them that they just are fictional. Where they otherwise would play along with the game, and where maybe the Darkeners don't fully understand how things in the light world work, they can at least just shrug it off. They don't need to understand beyond what they know, because to them, the dark world is all that matters. It's real enough to them, and they happily play their role. But if you show a Darkener that those weird mechanics and rules all actually have meaning, and that there's programming behind everything that they're doing, not just telling them that it's all in a script, but making them see the script the way that Gaster does, now that's gonna fuck with them pretty good. If you've spent your whole existence up to that point only seeing things in 2 dimensions, and then get to see in 3 dimensions, only to have that third one stripped away from you, knowing that you're never going to have access to that 3rd dimension, and therefore knowing that you are forever limited in some fundamental way, how are you ever going to make peace with that? That's what these characters are going through. That's what makes them become so severely affected by Gaster, because Gaster literally just sees more than the characters of Deltarune could possibly imagine on their own. With Rousey, to be fair, this can be a little more open. Rousey might not have actually seen the code the way that the secret bosses have, and perhaps that's why he's not going insane. Because he was simply told about it, not
either that or he is going insane, but he's just very good at hiding it.
Not shown the code itself. It's why he may only have a prophecy and some general ideas of some lore to go off of. I don't think he has the actual full script given to him by Gaster. He just has an outline of how the journey is supposed to go, to account for why he gets so surprised when he doesn't see the Susie and Noelle cutscene happen in the weird route. And I think there's not many better ways in general to make someone go insane than to show them the user interface of the world that they thought was real this whole time. To prove that something is connecting to them through a program that is from a reality beyond their understanding. And let me reiterate, this is not a theory claiming that Gaster is simulating the entirety of Deltarune and that this is all his doing. This theory is just saying that Gaster's showing the secret bosses a taste of what he had to learn when that experiment of his went so horribly wrong. I believe that in the timeline, after he shattered, something must have ensnared him about Deltarune's world so much that he wanted to reach out to characters like Spamton and Jevil and show them what he sees, or even try to give them an advantage only for it to not work out. And that on top of that, he told Rousey about what he sees, and that a player exists, and that there is a prophecy that must be carried out. For what reason exactly he did all of that, I don't know yet. But that's why we still have quite a few things left to go over before we can make any real conclusions. In fact, there is one more thing I need to touch on relating to the secret bosses before we move on from them. One thing that, sort of like the birdcage, has left me puzzled. And that's the shadow crystals. So far, we can get 2 of them, one for each chapter, and their overall purpose is very debated. We know Jevil must have gone one at some point after interacting with Gaster, but we also know that Spamton didn't immediately have a shadow crystal. At least, not until he became Spamton Neo, which could leave us to conclude that the shadow crystal was in the abandoned Neo body, a detail that I feel will be important to keep in mind. In any case though, we can assume that each secret boss will give us a shadow crystal. Sham also takes great note of them and seems to put a lot of focus into the shadow crystals, saying that they can make something incredible for us if we can find enough of them, establishing that these objects are important enough that it actually makes even Sham question their nihilism, even if only for a bit. As for what the crystals do exactly, in the Dark World it's rather straightforward. Both of them just show you the light world equivalent of where you are, that being the unused classroom and computer lab respectively. But the more inscrutable part of this is what they do in the light world, which is one of the few cases of a Dark World object having its own proper use in the light world, in the form of a shard of glass. And may even be debated if this actually is a shard of glass, given that the light world adds a "but" at the end, as if the narration isn't even sure of itself about that. Regardless, in Chapter 1, looking through the glass has Chris see through their hand, and in Chapter 2, it shows Susie glaring at them coldly when she's actually just smiling and making a rude gesture towards them. While the Dark World made the function of these crystals straightforward in that it showed a peek of the layer above, if the Light World is to be following this logic, then it's a lot more difficult to really gauge what we're peeking into here. That is, if that's what the crystals are even doing. There's a really good video by Weasel W about the shadow crystals that I'd like to use as just sorta jumping off point here, and that I'll be linking either in a card or in a description, as to analyze the crystals in a way that really put a lot of the weirder stuff about it into perspective. We know that Spamton found his crystal from the Neobody, a manifestation of Mettaton or Hapstablook's ideal body that got scrapped because it would never come to fruition anyway. We also know that the shadow crystals, because of this fact, do seem to enhance the secret boss's abilities, and for Spamton, seems to make him more unhinged after he gains control of the Neobody. Weasel's conclusion with all the observations they made was that the shadow crystals, tangibly, are squandered or shattered dreams. This would tie together its function between both worlds especially. Bringing back the core theme of dreams and Deltarune into this discussion, the Dark Worlds are fictional compared to the Light World, but they're also dream worlds in a way.
Squandered dreams. So that would be why Susie was shown frowning. It was showing a squandered dream of her not becoming a friend. Oh. Okay.
They take the thoughts of the Lightners and the will of the world's creator and allow those thoughts to manifest in different ways. And given that Deltarune came from a fever dream Toby had, and characters even equate the Dark World to a dream, the shadow crystals in this case may be literally seeing through the dream. They nullify it by showing the reality when looking through it. And as Weasel points out in the video, the Light World still applies to this, as it could be squandering the dreams that Chris might have in relation to their adventures. Their dream of perhaps being their own person and not living in Asriel's shadow,
or also, I mean, you know, being able-bodied, I mean, seeing through the hand, that might literally be, oh, squandered dream because an accident happened and you lost your arm.
Or their dream of growing closer with Susie, each of them being respectively muted upon looking through the glass. And it would explain why Spamton's crystal was found in a Neobody specifically. The crystal is a literal manifestation of Mettaton's dream body being squandered. And for Spamton, I think it would explain why he becomes so unhinged upon having a shadow crystal. Because as a character who is part of the dream, the act of being in possession of a shadow crystal is a self-destructive one if it's by a darkener. He would only see more darkness, only spiraling further in rather than being pulled out of it. Needless to say, you should go check out the video for yourself because it's a pretty damn good take on the whole thing in my opinion.
Well, I mean, I have enough future reactions on my plate. If anybody watching this wants me to watch it, you know, just let me know in the comments, okay?
But beyond that, I do think this is the best approximation we have for what the shadow crystals are exactly. And I'll be using this to aid in my own theory on what I think they'll culminate into and what purpose they really serve. So bear with me for a moment. There's an unused item in the game known as the Pure Crystal. It's all but confirmed to pretty much be the thing that Sham says they can stitch up for us if we collect enough shadow crystals. The description for the item especially aiding this notion, unless Toby decides to change his mind about it for the full release, which I personally doubt, but it is still a possibility given the crystals were kinda retconned into the game since the 2021 demo.
You know what Toby needs to do then is literally just change in the description, the flavor text, whatever you call it, instead of the cat, it's a cat. So it basically adds a whole bunch more, ooh, like which cat? Is it Chom? Who knows?
We know that each of the shadow crystals will come from a chapter's secret boss, and we know that we do need all of them in order for Sham to really find the hunt for them useful. You want to know something else about the shadow crystals that's worth noting, that I've also brought up earlier? If you've defeated a secret boss,
yeah,
as
you
long
find
as
them
the
in an
file where
alcove.
you defeated them is still present, you can always just get that boss's item in shadow crystal in another location.
What is this mod? What is this?
So far, we can get Jevil stuff in Castletown, for instance, and on top of that, Sham remembers you defeating Jevil. As I've mentioned before, this is the one thing that the game actually remembers across save files. This is the only thing that actually has some level of persistence between every playthrough, as long as the file where you defeated that boss still exists. And isn't it interesting that it happens to be involving characters who interacted with Gaster directly? As I've already touched on this from the meta perspective in a previous section, I'd like to get to the point. As I'm going to bring up again, there is something Toby has expressed regarding the ending of Deltarune that I think is super important for this discussion. In the FAQ for Deltarune, after he mentions that the game will only have one ending, the next question is, then doesn't that mean that nothing I do matters? Toby responds to this with, there's something more important than reaching the end. Again, this will pop up later, but I believe the first piece to really reaching that thing that's more important than the ending is the Shadow Crystals. What better way is there to draw the player further into the game's real objective than to send them on a quest to defeat optional bosses to get specific secret items? Not to mention that the next secret boss may very well exist on the same layer as the program that is connecting us to Deltarune in the first place. And the fact that these very items and bosses are the only thing that the game bothers to remember so far between every playthrough. So much so that it lets you collect their items in another location if you've at least defeated them once on some existing file. We also have to think about the purpose of doing this. Obviously, the secret bosses are significantly more difficult, so it would make sense to leave these items in another location for players who already did it and don't want to put up with fighting them again. But the logic behind that is interesting to me. You would have to do this knowing that the players are going to play through the game over again, even after finishing it. And remember what I said about the save files. Aside from Sham remembering secret boss fights from even other save files, there's shit like Azrael's drawer that changes in Chapter 1 depending on what slot you pick. And if Gaster was in fact aiding the player in the Spamton Neophyte, this may actually reveal something about his motivations potentially. I believe that Gaster may want the player to go through with this quest. He may actually be expecting the player to go through the game again, on something of a New Game Plus, if you will. Maybe not explicitly that, but the game might be built under the assumption that you are going to replay it, and that on top of that, he'll do what he can to make this journey for the Shadow Crystals possible for the player. There's a chance we may not even be able to get all of the crystals on a first playthrough, for example, but our ability to hop between save files, and also to get secret boss items in another location, may be the key to getting around that. If I am correct about this, then there literally is something more important than reaching the end in this case, because the ending isn't even the actual ending of the game, so to speak. It's just a way to open the door to reach something even more important than that. And maybe that's what Gaster might want. And if you couple this with the potential for more things in the game to change slightly just based on what slot you're in, I think there's a lot of potential for the game to draw you in further by pointing you towards replaying it and using what you already accomplished with the secret bosses to go through the game again.
Oh god, can you imagine that how a secret boss fights is directly tied to which save slot you're in? And you know, most people, like when they make the save, they use the first one by default. So just to screw with everybody, they make it so that the first slave slot is the hardest version of the boss.
Just under a much different context compared to the first time. In essence, the Shadow Crystals are the trailhead to what I believe is Deltarune's true ending, if you want to call it that, and to what I think will eventually be how the game actually handles revealing Gaster as a character. And if they represent shattered dreams, then putting them together into the pure crystal may very well represent the way forward. Taking those squandered hopes and times when people gave up, and turning them into a pointer towards where you should have been going this whole time. And I think that the pure crystal won't just be useful in the dark world, but in the light world too. If they were originally shards of glass that showed Chris their deepest fears and the ways that their journey could fuck up catastrophically, then maybe when purified, those pieces of glass will turn into something of a magic window. A window that will show Chris exactly what to do to make things right. A window that will lead the player to actually succeeding.
Okay, now I'm just imagining this thing turning into that little magical magnifying glass thing you get at the end of Bendy and the Ink Machine. You know, the one that shows all the magical glowing text on the wall written by Henry from different loops.
Maybe this is why Sham only has any semblance of hope for the Fun Gang if they pursue the Shadow Crystals. Because otherwise, they literally just won't be able to see the correct way to the true ending. And I think to that end, that's the best way that I can address the Shadow Crystals for now. It's the only way to factor them into this larger picture that makes sense so far to me, and I think for being one of many secrets in this game, and one of many things that clearly will relate to, and perhaps even lead us to a proper acknowledgement of Gaster directly, as well as the new future that he wants,
one can hope.
It's important to have some idea of what they may culminate into. So with that, I'd like to finally delve into the last few connections to Gaster, or more specifically, the last few secrets regarding him or characters related to him that I feel are worth noting if we want to figure out Gaster as a character.
Wait, there are
Those
more?
being the eggs and the weird root.
Oh,
the
right,
eggs
yeah.
don't need too much analysis, but they do relate to Gaster and are worth mentioning in my opinion.
Egg.
For one thing, your way of accessing the rooms with the man behind the tree are very much leaning into the secret and glitch hunting aspect of the game's meta-narrative.
Oh god,
like,
yeah.
finding a secret room by going in between two specific rooms and happening upon it by pure chance definitely echoes some of the fun event shenanigans back in Undertale, specifically the fake hallway and Mystery Man event, so to that end there is already a parallel to draw. But beyond that, there's also the overall glitchy nature of the eggs themselves, appearing in your inventory if you go to the Dark World even when you drop them in the Light World, and being put in random places with seemingly no real rhyme or reason to what they'll culminate into. If we wanted to also reach, the man behind the tree draws parallels to Gaster thanks to only referring to the man by that word, a man, and one could even make the connection about this and even the tree itself and placing the first egg in Asgore's fridge all having been foreshadowed in the Undertale True Lab.
It's all of this, and I remember I made the joke about it, but apparently it was a theory somebody had, in that, you know, Gaster isn't a skeleton, he's an egg monster that's cracked.
Which has some weight to it, I suppose. But the strongest evidence I feel towards this being related to Gaster is how the egg is referenced in one of Noelle's blog posts as a special egg in Cat Pedders. In all caps, by the way, that never hatched, could never be removed, and only left home due to happiness. But on top of that, Noelle was never able to remember the egg's name, a common calling card of Gaster's being the fact that he is just not able to be referred to or remembered by name for whatever reason aside from the Gaster followers. I'm not saying the egg's name was Gaster, of course, but as I touched on before, Noelle and Gaster have a worrying amount of connections to each other, and even if risking confirmation bias, I feel it's worth making this connection regardless. Ultimately, I don't think the eggs will culminate into anything super groundbreaking for the game's meta-narrative. As the description even puts it, they're not too important, but they're also not unimportant. They clearly will have some role and give a bit of insight into things if one were to collect all of them, and I'd say that they probably will be more lighthearted compared to something like collecting the Shadow Crystals, especially given that Temmie is who you end up going to in order to keep track of how many eggs you've collected in the game this far. Then again, she has gone on record to say that she is scarier than Gaster, and I personally believe her fully, so maybe this is actually Temmie that made the program for us and was talking to us on Twitter the whole time.
Oh my god, no! That's it. That's why Chris was throwing their soul out earlier. It's not self-harm. They were being controlled by Temmie.
I mean, Temmie is also 6 letters long. There's a pretty strong case for it if you think about it. But when we talk about the weird root in regards to the egg, this is especially supported because you can't actually get the Chapter 2 egg on the weird root. You're locked out of that completely, meaning that whatever the eggs are supposed to be for, the weird route is going to divert quite a bit from it. Either that, or it just wouldn't fit tonally with that route. And speaking of, we should also talk about the weird root in context with this section. There isn't much more to say about it at this point that I haven't already mentioned, but it is in my opinion the most extreme severity of the non-linearity under this meta-narrative.
Yeah.
As I said before, I believe this game is shrouded in secrets, and it makes the weird route an especially interesting case of it, because of who it involves and how it diverts from the main game. Aside from it intentionally being meant to be discovered purely by word of mouth, I feel it plays further into the fact as well that this game is meant to be seen through. What claims to have only one ending and just some secret bosses is hiding a lot more than that and is capable of going much deeper. But it's also interesting because if I feel Gaster is so closely associated with the non-linearity end of this, then how does he feel about the player going through the weird route? especially when considering that if Rouse was informed by Gaster about the intended order of events, he's shocked to see things turn out differently in the weird route.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard to say. You'd think if Gaster were to take issue with it, that he'd do something to prevent the weird route from being possible. Probably not terminating the connection because that would go against the function of the program, but stopping the player in some way. And yet, we're allowed to go through the game and do this route despite that. However, I personally doubt that he is enabling this route either. If you were to look at Deltarune, or the program specifically, as an experiment of his, and the experiment involves observing the player's use of their connection to Deltarune, we have to remember that we're dealing with a scientist here, and the last thing a scientist should do in an experiment is intervene and skew the results.
Yeah.
I think to him, this is just one of many trials, one of many outcomes, and he'd rather sit back and see what happens instead of taking any particular stance morally. For all we know, the only thing that really matters to Gaster is that the player just gets to the ending. It doesn't really matter how the player does it, just that they get there in some way or another. And that's the thing about Gaster that is so important and that I really want to touch on here. I've said already that I believe he is this game's Flowey equivalent in terms of his role in the game's meta-narrative, but that doesn't mean that I outright see him as an antagonist the same way that I see
Morally
Flowey as
gray,
one.
okay.
He doesn't have any ill intentions towards the player. I don't believe he's trying to mislead anyone, but he is an awfully curious person. He finds everything interesting. And he wants to see everything through rather than draw any lines for experimentation. Sure, this means that things like the weird route will be allowed, and that's not really the best look. But to cut that off would mean to limit the experiment, and that's against what I think Gaster stands for thematically. I personally think that he'd rather the player be free to explore as much as they want, even if that means breaking things and diverting harshly from the main route in the process in some cases. And besides, it's not like that's getting directly in the way of the prophecy itself so far. Chris still does what they do at the very end of the chapter, and we can still collect the shadow crystals on the weird route. Which again, if I think there's anything that Gaster is encouraging, then that would have to be the collection of the shadow crystals. That probably would matter more to him than anything else if I had to make any guesses. Of course, this very well could change later in the game when the next chapters roll around, but as it is, I think that as long as you're moving forward towards that new future, Gaster isn't concerned about the means in which you do so. That, and especially because you can just have the weird route on one save file for now and do a normal route on another, and the shadow crystals may gear up to be something that warrants multiple playthroughs anyway, this might honestly just not concern him for all I know. And given the fact that the Twisted Sword exists, and currently is only possible to make on an aborted weird route by not giving the Thorn Ring to Noelle, if this stays the case, and we need to abort a weird route in order to make the Twisted Sword and put the pure crystal to good use, this may very well be another step towards approaching this game's potential true objective. He may not enable the weird route itself, but he's okay with letting it happen for science's sake, and also because it may be a way to get the player to accomplish his overall goal with Deltarune's world.
I mean, literally, isn't that what I said before about the whole thing? It's all about the science!
And with all of that said, now that I've addressed these two things, I want to lead into Noelle. She seems incredibly important to Gaster.
Yeah,
she's one of the three characters that he notes as being very, very wonderful, and there are several connections between him and Noelle that I've already gone over. And I find this especially notable because of the fact that she is a known glitch hunter, a hobby that lines up very closely with how the player comes across things related to Gaster in the first place. If it's not glitches, then it's some form of hunting for secrets or poking around where you're not supposed to. The Ice Palace blog post especially stands out in this regard, in how she managed to find a secret door in Dragon Blazers that shouldn't be possible to find, that can't be opened by any key in the game, in a maze that the devs claim is just one of the bad guys' magic spells if you go in without a certain character in the party. A kind of thing that very well feels like something that we may encounter later in Deltarune, especially given the game already has used Dragon Blazers to allude to itself on multiple occasions.
Yeah.
But of course, there's also the particular connection that Noelle has to Spamton, and how she views some of it as nostalgic. Spamton's connections to Gaster already being clear as day. And with all of this put together, it becomes obvious that something is up with Noelle in relation to Gaster especially. Particularly when, with all of this in mind, we consider her account of a certain event that occurred behind the cemetery, in which she blinks out on something that must have happened to her, involving the bunker. There's something I'd like to propose now with this information all being presented. Under the likely assumption that the person behind the unused script is Des, this suddenly brings a whole new slew of implications. because I'd like to note something else about Noelle's blog that might be important.
What?
From what I could tell, Des is never mentioned on any of her blog posts. At least, certainly not by name.
Oh.
Maybe she's alluded to in the Blue Circle post when Noelle mentions how she checks spam mail in case it's someone real, and in which case that had to have taken place after Des's disappearance, and while Noelle was searching for her ad nauseum online, but not even in the Ice Palace post is Des mentioned, where Noelle's mom is mentioned at least. And that appeared to be one of the earlier experiences that she had with finding glitches and secrets in games.
So wait, did she start getting really obsessed with finding glitches and secrets and stuff like that after Des disappeared? Could this fascination be some sort of weird... I don't want to use the word infection, but like, could she have been... But could, like, possibly potentially getting close to Gaster or whatever is in the bunker potentially have affected her in some way?
I can't confirm completely that this is the case, but it would be incredibly fitting, if not horribly ironic, if Noelle's uncanny ability to look for secrets and glitches is perhaps some side effect of Des's disappearance. Attempts by someone to reach out and speak through the darkness, to get anyone to listen and find them, and to manifest that desire in the form of secrets and glitches in video games that people like Noelle can't help but be drawn towards. I can't think of a better way for all of this to line up personally. Having her own sister's disappearance literally haunt her, even through the game she plays in an attempt to escape from the trauma of it. And with everything that I've gone over, the secret bosses, the connections between Gaster and Dark Worlds in general, the shadow crystals, the weird route, and Des's disappearance having something to do with Noelle's ties to the philosophy behind going about the more obscure aspects of Deltarune, I think this all lays out enough evidence, to me at least, to question if this game really will have only one ending. I think the game will have just one ending going by the main route, and if we were to go by the assumption that an ending here means going all the way from chapter 1 to whatever the last chapter is. There's a chance the weird route will alter it, and honestly I'd be kind of surprised if it doesn't, but the shadow crystals especially feel like the trail ahead to something else entirely. A different ending, but not in the conventional sense. Not by getting from point A to point B, but by finding the right pocket to veer completely off the road altogether.
In this case, it's going from A to 9.
And I think the shadow crystals especially will be a way to figure out what that pocket is supposed to be, along with using the 3 save slots and the nature of Deltarune as a program in more creative ways. There is something more important than reaching the end. And I think we're supposed to take that not just metaphorically, but literally too. There's something along the way in the middle of the game that is, in my opinion, the real goal of Deltarune. That being, to find Des. I don't know yet how it'll take us there, but I'm certain that is the culmination of all the secrets that this game has for us. And for some reason, every time, no matter what way I put these secrets together, I keep feeling like Des is at the center of all of them.
Oh god, why are there so many of these?
I think I'd like to actually bring us back down to ground level for a moment. I feel like we've been kinda bouncing off of a ton of different topics and analyzing so much shit related to Gaster that it can be hard to really keep track of it all. He's an incredibly esoteric character who warrants analysis through many different ways other than directly analyzing him like we could with other characters.
And that's mainly because we've technically never actually met the guy!
And after a certain point, the question has to be asked, what's this all really boiling down to? Who actually is Gaster anyway? What can
Gaster is Toby Fox, that's all we can go.
we learn about him now as a character, and in regards to his motivations with everything I've discussed? Well, I do have to admit something. Even after all of this analysis about stuff relating to Gaster, I still can't get a good grasp of his character yet. It feels like there's simply just too much left out still to build a profile of him in the same way that I could build a profile for someone like Des, or any other character for that matter. But I think I can gauge at least a theme and profile for him, not necessarily as a character in the normal sense, but as a concept. We have to think about what Gaster is currently. He's no singular piece or whole being. He is a scattered presence that is everywhere and nowhere. And any given piece of him might give us a clue as to what kind of character he is, but not enough to confidently gauge his personality or his aspirations and motives. But he does represent something in the meta-narrative that I feel is essential to it. Curiosity. Looking for secrets, experimenting with a game in a fictional world beyond its limits. An endless desire for more, rooted in a feeling that there is something else to find, though we just haven't looked hard enough for it yet. This is his field of expertise. It's his science. Much like how for many players, it's what they specialize in. It's what they data mine and manipulate files for. It's what they perform glitches and exploits in pursuit of. It's what they make videos and entire fucking blogs about.
It's literally just, like, it's another flavor of Chara at this point, isn't it? Or where Chara is, like, the player's love of just seeing numbers go up and getting stronger. Gaster is the player's just want of finding something new, it would seem.
To me, Gaster and secret hunting are synonymous. There is a character in the game who embodies someone just as curious as some players would be, and who ends up being just as enthralled in the mystery surrounding him, and looking for his sister just so happens to be linked to this very act of looking for secrets, and may be the key to actually completing Deltarune for all we know. That's how deeply embedded this theme of curiosity is. Flowey worked so well in Undertale because he was the game's way of keeping you immersed even when you were sure you were entirely detached from the experience. Because guess what? They have a character that embodies that exact concept and has done the same shit you did. And now because of that, the act of being emotionally detached from Undertale is acknowledged as a core part of the game's narrative and benefits itself from that detachment. And Gaster in Deltarune is the game's way of keeping you immersed by enabling that secret hunter in you. By acknowledging the over-attachment to it, by continuing to enable this constant desire for more. Because Gaster too wants more. He wants more out of Deltarune's world. He wants a new future in the first place, and that's why he brought you along. This meta-narrative works so fucking well because he has the same motivation to go through this experience that you do, before you even knew of its existence. He knows that you've been looking for him, just as he's been looking for you too. That's why Gaster works so well as a character, even with the absolute bare minimum that we have about him. He was so committed to the bit that he became the bit itself. It's because of that I feel he is perfect as a vehicle for this game's themes, and everything that connects back to him only seems to double down on this theme that he represents, of freedom. Let's backtrack to when he was shadowed across time and space. I believe this came as a result of him going too far with Dark Worlds, perhaps something like opening a fountain within a fountain, or doing that enough times to where he had suspended himself too far and now only exists as a vague presence. I find this to be equivalent to being shunted out of the Light World layer, or in this case just Undertale's world, and sent to the Program layer, the space between worlds as I call it. Because he was sent out of it, I believe this would lead him to the realization that Undertale is simply fictional. He sees the code, he sees the programming behind everything, the real meaning behind saving and loading and resetting. He sees that it's all just fake. He sees it almost like the player does. And he may become aware that there is a player of some sort. Maybe not by that name, but he sees that there's some higher force at play. This would have huge implications to him and to the theme that I believe he embodies, something that Undertale never touched on, but that Gaster would be plagued by. The fact that his freedom doesn't truly exist in Undertale. It's not real, and that he never had actual freedom to begin with. Sure, there were alternate routes and all these endless outcomes, but something had to make that world. Something laid the tracks out for them. There was no instance where these characters weren't programmed to do something, scripted to act a specific way. There was only ever an illusion of such a thing. It's not too far off from what Flowey realized after exhausting every possible outcome, but for Gaster it's different in that he just sees it. He sees it all at once, and he doesn't get to keep the attachment that Flowey at least was able to lose gradually. It's all ripped away from Gaster in one fell swoop. But, and I'm not sure how yet, but upon seeing Deltarune's world, and the things that happen in it, and Death's disappearing, and the eventual fate that would fall upon it, of the world being covered in darkness, I think something clicks in him. He stops being bummed out about his circumstances, and unlike Flowey, where he just became completely apathetic eventually, and adopted the kill or be killed mentality, I think where he represented the way that fading emotional investment affects a fictional world, Gaster represents a case of someone who becomes way too invested emotionally in a fictional world. So much so that Gaster himself grows attached to Deltarune. He becomes enamored with that game's world. He wants a new future for it. He's so attached to this specific world that he wants to alter the events of its story. He becomes so attached even that it reflects in some of the fun events. The clam girl talking about Susie and how the time to meet her is fast approaching. The several phone calls that seem weirdly in and out of place at the same time. The different Icy cross route, even though for all we know, Icy probably doesn't even exist in the underground. In any case, he starts leaving pieces of Deltarune in Undertale. He becomes interested in Chris and Susie and Noelle and what they're going through. He thinks they are wonderful characters and he wants them to see something better than what they have currently coming their way. Or, at the very least, just something different.
Oh my god, how could I have not seen this coming? Gaster. All of this is Gaster's fanfiction. That's all Deltarune is. It's all fanfiction and we've been taken for a ride!
Yet, he knows that he can't do it alone, and it's going to be difficult to change that. But it's here that he remembers someone. The player. I believe that the fun events were a way for Gaster to take advantage of him existing beyond resets and the core mechanics of Undertale to throw some bones the player's way. By this point, he knows the player is, like himself, curious. Always wanting to know more about something. After all, that's why he is in his current situation. And just about all of the fun events, if they don't reference Gaster, could very well reference something about Deltarune. I think it was his way of not only seeing if the player could find him, but if the player was interested in Deltarune at all. I mean, the game is even advertised as something that you can play after Undertale. In a way, Deltarune was built with an Undertale player's curiosity in mind. And I believe it's through this that Gaster creates the program that is Deltarune as an executable. Using the feedback he got from the fun events, he wants to take the player's suspension of disbelief, knowing that the player sees it all as fictional, and channel it into a diegetic connection to Deltarune. He realizes there's no better variable for change than allowing a higher force to just appear in Deltarune's world and do whatever the hell it wants. He wants to take this world that was otherwise sent on one linear path and introduce more freedom to it. Hell, why do you think it's even called Deltarune? Delta is a symbol for change, and a rune can mean many things, but here specifically can refer to a type of stone or object with a runish inscription on it. That object being perhaps a device made for the very purpose of provoking change.
The device is a tablet. Who else would have thought of such a thing?
Literally, a Deltarune. This next experiment does indeed seem very, very interesting. Because aside from introducing more freedom, this is an experiment about the player especially. The player carries the fate of the world, and he sees the potential to examine the dynamic between the player and protagonist. And he wants to see how far the suspension of disbelief can go. For one thing, everything related to him you have to divert from the main story for, and the secret bosses so far relate a lot to themes of freedom, and how they each attain or attempt to attain it after seeing things the way that Gaster does. Compared to Undertale, you have 3 save slots and not just one. You're able to make your own thrash machine that's carried over between chapters. The Dark World in general accommodates your existence and gives you all of these choices, barring Susie sometimes overriding them, but there's so much more freedom and encouragement to just explore the game. Gaster even lets the player make a vessel at the beginning, lets them shape the vessel to their will, give it their own name, and maybe even joke a bit about how, of course, the player sees themselves in this character.
And yet he just then rips it out of their hands and throws it away.
But, of course, amidst this attempt for more freedom in Deltarune, it's all discarded. See, there's one more thing I've been leaving out of this section. The fact that, despite all of these choices, non-linearity is only one end of the meta-narrative. And despite being so close to making your own vessel to project onto, in a sudden tonal shift that, compared to everything else I've said about Gaster, seems weirdly out of character, it's instead discarded, and you're shunted to take control of Chris for the rest of the game. There's a lot of debate about this specific section. More specifically, on if the character that discarded the vessel was Gaster or someone else. And for the purpose of this series, I'm going to take a firm stance and say that no, this was not Gaster that interrupted the Gonnermaker.
What?
This is a second voice. And it's not just because of the immediate change in typer value. I know that it changing from 666 to 2 doesn't really indicate a change in character inherently. Suzy uses it, for instance, not too long after. And it's not just because of the fact that the Japanese translation of this scene speaks a lot more like Kara than it does like Gaster. Not confirming that this is Kara, but in any case, it certainly doesn't write like Gaster does. To me, it's a much simpler reason. And this sounds like a petty one, but I really mean it.
Is it literally just the universe itself fighting back against Gaster's like manipulations and stuff like that?
If this was also Gaster, why the fuck is this not also in all caps? No, really, why? If this was also him, it would have gone just as, if not even more raw in all caps compared to normal casing. It doesn't even take on the same glowing appearance that Gaster's text has. This alone, to any average player, I feel would have to register as, oh, someone just cut Gaster off. I don't know who, but someone didn't want him to give us this vessel. And I know some of you are gonna bring up the fact that Sans does the same thing in Undertale. You'd be dead where you stand, etc. But here's the thing, you are not going to take a fucking sentence like that seriously if it were written in Comic Sans.
Well, I mean, you never know. Some people are weird.
Furthermore, we know that Sans says that anyway because he's literally right there. He's in the frame. His character portrait still shows up. And we don't have either of those things for Gaster. If both voices were really him, then this change in casing seems utterly useless to do in my opinion. Its only purpose ends up being to just spawn a pointless debate about if it's him or not. And I know Toby is no stranger to red herrings. Look at the end of Chapter 1, or
oh god, yeah.
in the intro cutscene to Undertale where players are meant to confuse Kara for Frisk in that intro cutscene. But I just don't see why trying to cast doubt on if the second voice is Gaster would be beneficial to the story if the second voice is just Gaster anyway. The Undertale intro cutscene worked because players who are going in blind aren't going to know who Kara is.
And they're not gonna and like even noticing like the difference in shirt pattern. I mean, that's not really one of the first things you notice going in.
They don't know that the human there is a different human from the one they're playing as. That, and because Kara ends up being such a drastically unique character from Frisk, with their own baggage that ends up entirely recontextualizing bits of the intro. But we know Gaster exists. There's little reason to imply that it isn't him if it actually is him, and we already know who the first voice is. And honestly, if it were the case, then I don't think just allowing him to be easily identified as the second voice would really give that much away. If anything, wouldn't that actually help further the mysterious nature of him by making the player really think about his motivations more? Is he stupid? This sudden switch-up can only tell the player either, oh shit, someone cut Gaster off, or wait, Gaster doesn't actually want me to use the vessel? Why? What is he actually getting at then? And to me, the way this was written feels more like the former, and I don't think it can say both at once because it makes no fucking sense to say both at once. Just
no,
pick
it doesn't.
one or the other. Or else you're going to muddy up the actual message behind this scene, which I think would really suck for what's effectively supposed to be this game's kill or be killed moment, no? Imagine if when you got hit by the friendliness pellets in Undertale, Flowey just disappears and a disembodied voice starts speaking in a whole other font, saying what Flowey says at that part before Toriel stops him, only to then learn that was just Flowey anyway. Like, fucking what? By process of elimination, I can't see how this can come across more like the latter of the two.
Wait, that's just it. The other voice is Flowey, or maybe even Asriel. That's what he's been doing at college. He's been doing weird stuff.
If it really were the latter, then just keep using all caps and establish that, yes, this is in fact still Gaster. The scene would be good enough of a red herring as is, and it would still serve the purpose of keeping his motivations vague because of the conflicting nature of that scene. Does Gaster want me to have free choices or not? What is the point of doing two red herrings at once if just one already works well enough? My point is, this change in casing is way too intentional for me to take it as anything other than a second voice interrupting him at the last possible second. Hey, so, Before I go any further with this is where I have to make my one and only substantial addendum to this script after my original completion of it.
Okay, so yeah, I was kind of holding off on this on the last thing, but what is with the 2 different avatars, Molly? What is going on?
It will be a bit of a tangent into another topic, as I don't know where else to fit this in, but I will wrap back around to the second voice with this, and it's something I was originally intending on leaving out, and even said I would leave out in a couple places at first. But after giving it more thought, I've realized that including it may only really be a good thing rather than a bad one. Let's go back to a little bit earlier this year.
Newsletter, okay. Right, I completely forgot that this was going to be brought up.
Just some hours before Valentine's Day of 2024, an issue of the Undertale Deltarune newsletter released that was, well, themed around Valentine's Day. We got to see Spamton v. Spamton again, and there was some unsurprising but ultimately pretty nice news and a few other cool tidbits here and there. However, at the beginning of it, everyone got 3 Valentine's cards from the characters of Undertale and Deltarune, which were randomized for everyone that got them. From what I know, there were exactly 44 cards that people could have gotten, and one of them was a rather long letter from a certain unknown character. It's a strange letter. It's more or less completely illegible, but if you squint your eyes and you squint your heart, for some reason you feel you could understand it.
Squint your heart? That sounds painful.
Well, Happy New Year. Or was it the old year? Well, in any case, how was Deltarune? As you are waiting patiently, the time is going around. There was even a rumor of Valentine's Day. How absurd. Every day is a day of love, if only you believe it so. Do you believe it so?
So this is probably, obviously, Gaster. This, though, I mean, just that one line alone, is Gaster a hopeless romantic? Hi, yes, it's me, future editing Fortmaster here. And just the day after I watched this video, I came across a video by somebody called Not Aiden called Gaster Should Be Voiced by J.K. Simmons.
How good is the science here? Get a load of this. I'm dead. And to be honest, they're not even really testing anymore. They just all portaled in, made a human pyramid, ate my lunch, and portaled out.
So this, combined with the Valentine's Day newsletter, has convinced me that Gaster is really goofy, like, personality-wise, and you cannot convince me otherwise now. That is my official headcanon.
So, the purpose of the message. I want to help. Yes, there was someone I wanted to help. I seem to have forgotten who. Yes, it's quite ironic, but I seem to have forgotten. Was it myself? No. Well, perhaps. Regardless, when I see them, I'm certain I will know it straight away. I never forget someone I don't remember. Will you help
What?
me? You are very odd responding out loud to a letter. But you seem reliable. I will be counting on you. Now, put on your coat and wash your face. Or, put on your face and wash your coat. Not necessarily in that order. Or in any order at all. Goodbye. There was a sound like something walking away, and the letter was gone.
Oh, okay.
If you go to the link that this letter originally was found on, you'll now be met with just a completely blank letter with only the border. However, there is a Wayback Archive link to verify that this is indeed a real letter, and just in case you want to read it for yourself. Now,
Okay.
I initially had been going back and forth about this letter a ton. It completely blindsided me, as it did the general fandom as of writing this, and I believe it was written to purposefully do so, mainly in regards to trying to figure out who exactly wrote this. As usual with anything that seems Gaster related, it's just labeled as an unknown letter. There's no direct label for who wrote it. And pulling up the traits that I have commonly associated with Gaster, there are a lot of things here that line up with him. The line breaks and somewhat fragmented speech, the all caps in general, the acknowledgement of Deltarune as a program and acknowledging how time is passing in our own reality, the letter being described as strange and having an illegible handwriting that you could only understand if you squint your heart, it fucking disappearing after people found it. There's Gaster DNA all over this. And yet, while Gaster does have a sort of whimsy tone to him, it seems to be amplified in this letter. It's unusually informal, and even if we just chalk that up to the fact that writing a Valentine's letter is a much less formal context than engaging in a whole-ass experiment, there's still the fact that the speaker seems a bit confused, scatterbrained, asking for our help and being suddenly jovial compared to Gaster otherwise being a bit more toned down with his responses. And when we consider that the sweepstakes was teasing another character that was speaking in all caps and who we could assume to be a future secret boss, it ends up making two camps here. One where the letter was written by Gaster, and another where it was written by someone like Friend, or hell, I've even seen mentions of this being written by the man behind the tree, given the appearance of these more conflicting statements. New Year versus Old Year, unsure if he was forgetting about himself or someone else and the like. Sort of echoing this in-between mentality, being not too important, but not too unimportant. So, as I've said, and as I hope
I mean, admittedly, with the whole thing of Gaster potentially being, fragmented and scattered, it could literally be all of the above, like Eggman, Friend. They could literally be just fragments of Gaster, just taking on different aspects of his original personality.
was clear as to why, I've been going back and forth on this a lot. Every time I think I'm convinced that this is written by one character, I see fuel for this being written by someone else. But the general debate that I've seen this boil down to is if this is or isn't written by Gaster. I have my own personal feelings about it, but I'm gonna decide to not go too into that here. Because the thing is, regardless of who wrote this letter, I think in any case, it damn near confirms parts of the device theory and my personal views on the game itself. If Gaster wrote this, then we not only finally have a more concrete idea of his character and what he's like outside of conducting experiments, but we also have a more thorough insight as to his motivations for making Deltarune as the program. In this context, while he doesn't remember who he wants to help, he is making the program because he wants to help someone. And given that this would be his actual motivation in this case, this may be a point in favor of what I believe to be the game's ultimate goal of finding Des. I already had this thought that maybe he is making this program to alter the future by helping someone in particular. But if Gaster wrote this himself, then it just flat out confirms that this is indeed what he's aiming on doing. Given how important Des is to the Lightners, and how Des seems to exist on the same layer as Gaster, this would all check out in my opinion. Or, if he's not trying to help Des specifically, maybe this gives us insight into why Noelle in particular is dealing with so many Gaster shenanigans. Maybe he's trying to help her find Des, if I had to speculate. And it would even be a point in favor of the theory that Noelle's ability to look for glitches came as a result of Des's disappearance. They're pointers that are trying to tell Noelle to keep searching for her, that she just hasn't looked hard enough yet. Whatever it is, this motivation would more than likely line up with what I already predicted regarding Gaster's end goal in all of this. It's a bit shaky, because I doubt that Gaster would have a hard time remembering someone like Noelle when she's one of the three characters that he calls particularly wonderful in the Garner Maker, but I still think it's worth considering. And even if that's not the case, if this is showing a completely new side to his character, and one with more actual depth, showing him to be his own person and not just a vague concept of something, then this even further supports my belief of what he represents in the game's meta-narrative. With what little of his personality that we see in the Garner Maker, we can tell that he's an incredibly curious person. He finds everything the player does super interesting. He has great investment in the world of this game and in the player, and I think that's reflected even more in this letter. Him asking about Deltarune, having this unique perspective on Valentine's Day and how absurd it is, and time passing in our reality in general. Asking these questions in regards to what or who he forgot, even commenting on the reader responding out loud to the letter and calling it very odd. I think he's always had some element of whimsy to him, but if this is written by Gaster, it shows how in a more informal context, that's just how he is. And I think for what he represents in the game, that is incredibly fitting, and if it is giving us a better look at his more specific motivations beyond wanting to create a new future, I think it lines up perfectly with what I already believe the game is trying to steer us towards. But, on the other hand, if this is not written by Gaster, but rather by someone else, whether that be Friend or the man behind the tree or what have you, this still is a bombshell in favor of my theory, and perhaps even more so than if Gaster wrote it. Because it would confirm the fact that there is another character, at least one out there, who is able to see the game exactly as Gaster does. referring to Deltarune as the fictional work, the program. It straight up confirms that yes, this program does exist as a tangible object in the game. It is something that other characters can become potentially aware of and comment on directly. If Friend wrote this letter, then it would explain why Sean would see Friend as an impossible character to win against. Because again, we would be dealing with someone who sees the game the same way we do, and may know it even better than we do, and can take advantage of that. And even if it's not Friend, again, it being anyone other than Gaster would still confirm that the program, the game as an executable, exists diegetically in this story. And that alone is extremely useful information. While I can't give a solid answer currently on who I think wrote the letter, I can tell you this much. Regardless of whether Gaster wrote this letter or not, I think it's a win-win for this theory and this series in general.
Wonderful.
If Gaster wrote it, then that's just more material for me to narrow down his motivations and general character with, and the picture it paints lines up strikingly well with what I already had assumed of him beforehand. And if it isn't written by him, then it would confirm that Deltarune, as a program, does exist as a tangible object in the game. And if it's written by Friend specifically, then it explains why he's referred to in all caps in the files, and in any case shows that characters are capable of acknowledging the game as the program, the same way that Gaster sees it. I think it confirms that this is something that matters to the story. Either way, this letter is starting to make me think that maybe I was right on the fucking Cromer with this one, and I could still be wrong. But from what I can tell, this letter is extremely in favor of my own interpretations of this game so far. And to wrap back around to the second voice in the Goner Maker, if Gaster did write this letter, then this would just be even more evidence against the second voice also being Gaster. Just assuming that he wrote this letter, look at how it's written. Again, he has always had this hint of whimsy to how he speaks in Deltarune, especially so far. And for him to just suddenly say something as cold as, "You can't choose who you are in this world," it just seems out of character in my opinion. Because doesn't he have a great interest in the player's choices and what they do?
Yeah, he
Wouldn't
does.
he be saying that he is counting on the player's input? Why would he discard the player's choices in the same breath in which he expresses an interest for those exact choices? From what I can tell, what he says in the Goner Maker feels sincere. And with the context of this letter, again, assuming this was written by him, I think it completely shuts down any chance of the second voice being Gaster in my opinion. But even without this letter, I am still pretty damn certain of the second voice being another character. Which, with that established, obviously leads us to the next question. If this is a second voice, then who
was
is
it?
Exactly? Well, we currently don't know much of anything about them. But if Gaster was on the non-linearity part of this meta-narrative, I believe that the second voice is on the linearity end. It saw that Gaster was about to have the player be introduced through a vessel and put a stop to that before he could go any further. And I believe the only quote from the second voice that's really worth noting is how it says that you cannot choose who you are in this world. This character is the thing enforcing the linearity in Deltarune's world. It can't stop the player being connected to it, but it's going to do what it can to keep it in check and to keep the story going as it's supposed to. And I believe this character is the reason Gaster became so invested in giving Deltarune a new future. Or rather, it's the main thing that's been standing in the way of that goal. See, we have to consider why exactly Gaster was so invested in this game's world. What is his experiment with it to begin with? Why does he need the player to be involved? Why did he make an entire program to connect us to this world? We know it's because he's trying to introduce more freedom and create a new future, but if there's a force that's stopping that, then that's a force that's getting in the way of it, and one that needs another force of a similar level of power to deal with. Gaster's main motivation, and the thing that he feels will give this world a new future, is simple. And honestly, it's kind of a shock I didn't catch on to it sooner.
Is it Toby? You know, the game's developer.
It's so fucking obvious. This is a JRPG. He wants to kill God. Non-linearity versus linearity.
Oh, okay. Never mind. Yeah, I forgot this was technically a JRPG. Yeah.
Gaster versus the Angel.
The Angel, right! I keep forgetting. Wait, does that mean it's versus Azrael?
Yeah, so do you survey heads from 2018 remember when there were all those theories about how the second voice was Kara and that Deltarune is actually just Gaster and Kara fighting for control over the narrative? Yeah, this is that if the Deltarune community wasn't fucking around! When considering everything diegetic to the game so far, and how they serve to either pull the player towards staying on script or going off script, and the fact that the game's themes in some way or another relate to this dynamic, it only makes sense that the main reason Gaster is so invested in Deltarune's world and why he wants a new future for it is because he finds the fatalism that the angel enforces to be worth challenging. He saw what the author wrote, and he doesn't like it. He sees how without any input, the world just ends and everything is just covered in darkness, and he wants to change that. He's too invested in the story to leave it as is, and he wants to use the player as a means of catalyzing that change, by having them represent the fate of the world. While right now, we don't know too much about the Angel as a character, I can't think of a better candidate to fit the second voice. It especially appears all over the Light World, where it seems to have more control, and it probably didn't want the player to be in Deltarune to begin with, and so doesn't accommodate more for the player because of it. But then the Dark World comes in, and we have Gaster being more present there, and he wants the player to keep going, with the Angel only being able to intervene here and there to enforce some degree of linearity. I'd even argue that the Angel probably doesn't take kindly to Dark Worlds in general because of the fact that they allow so much escapism and free choice, when it ultimately doesn't change anything substantially in the Light World, and it's all going to end the same way regardless. I believe that as this game continues, this tug-of-war between Gaster and the Angel will only become more apparent. And I'd even argue that it's already taking place when you consider the fact that Chapter 1 was able to stay mostly on track, only for Chapter 2 to introduce the weird route. It was able to maintain only one major route for a bit, but more opportunities and loopholes appear in Chapter 2 to go further off script. And of course, this is all in pursuit of creating a new future for the game from Gaster's point of view. And with that, I'd like to throw in one last theory with some evidence to it, and it goes all the way back to the beginning of this game's rollout. Remember the him.png image from the Deltarune website, which first quoted entry 17, but then quoted a part of the legend that 3 heroes appeared to banish the Angel's heaven? In our first encounter with Ralze in Deltarune, when he mentions the legend, he specifically refers to it as a legend that was foretold through time and space. The same wording used to describe Gaster's shattering. And conveniently, it's the first piece of content we really got about Deltarune aside from entry 17. And it was written in Wingdings by Gaster. I think Gaster was the one who wrote that prophecy, because banishing the Angel's heaven likely is a way to terminate the Angel altogether. That is his new future. That is why Ralze is so insistent on keeping things on track, because that is how Gaster plans to stop it. And in fact, it may even be the end result of getting the Shadow Crystals, in that otherwise, the game will just end as the Angel originally intended for it to. Gaster wants to change that by having us look for the Shadow Crystals and use them to finally banish the Angel's heaven and create the new future that we've been looking for. And create the new future that we've been looking for. And create the new future that we've been looking for. And create the new
God,
future
Molly's
that we've been looking
broken.
for.
Help!
And create the new future that we've been looking for. And create the new future that we've been looking for. And create the new future that we've been looking for. However, you might have noticed something upon me saying this. This is awfully contradictory, isn't it? This whole time I've been talking about Gaster being for non-linearity, and yet he himself is railroading us towards a specific outcome?
Okay, the video is going weird, right? That's not just me, right? And that is it for now, unfortunately. This is, of course, a part of a much larger reaction, so link to the next part should be appearing, somewhere over my face, as well as in the corner of the video. I hope you guys liked. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you have not, and I'll see you in the next part. See ya!